Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day one of Truth and Reconciliation Week. Hopefully you can all hear me this morning. My name is Jeff Junk. I'll be helping facilitate our session today. I'm actually a volunteer from RBC, and I work on the bank's community marketing and citizenship team. I'm joining from Toronto today, and for that reason, I want to acknowledge that the land on which I live, work, and gather with others is the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, Toronto is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people, and it's within the territory of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. And because we're all meeting virtually, I also want to quickly acknowledge that the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations peoples across the country. Today's session is Wampum Talk. We are all treaty people. If you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them in real time. I know a lot of you have been introducing yourselves already, which is great to see. But I also want to give a very warm welcome to our speaker today, Dakota Brant, who's joining us from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. Dakota is an artist, entrepreneur, and consultant working with communities around the world. And we're both pleased to welcome you to this session. Dakota, I will turn things over to you to share a bit more about yourself and get into the great presentation you have planned for us.
Hello, everybody. Segos kana ne wat konuerados, deo just guate ne waksana unwe, dano ganya ke haga ni no te gade hoga, wagita roda, wat konuerado se wego, wagatano ni ji agwega on se wego ga inza west no I say what dakari the hello and greetings, everybody. My English name is Dakota Brant, and in Mohawk, I'm known as Deo Just Aguate. It means a shining constellation or causing the stars to be bright. And I'm a member of the Mohawk Nation Turtle Clan from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. So I'm here in Six Nations right now, and I own a business here and live my life here. And I'm so happy to be here with all of you today. Before we get started, a couple things is I love questions. No such thing as a dumb question. I guarantee if you have a question that's in your mind throughout the next 45 minutes or so, I guarantee that there's probably a few other people who have the same question. So by all means, feel free to put that question to the chat box. And I believe it's either Jeff or Theo. I believe it'll be Jeff that might be able to get to me with your questions. And it feels crazy right now. I'm talking to so many people and I'm like alone in my room, my dining room. And so I guess we started a little late. I just wanted to check in terms of time. Theo, I just realized now too that what time we'll be able to actually complete the presentation. I just want to make sure that I'm being respectful of time, knowing that everybody needs to, everybody's got their time commitments. Is that a question for Theo or Jeff? Because we started a little early, or a little late, sorry. So 45 minutes starting from, okay. So I'll just go for 45 minutes then. I got a little chat box answer here. Okay. So hello, everybody. Welcome to Wampum Talk. We are all treaty people. And I just wanted to get started a little bit with talking about acknowledging where the knowledge that I'll be speaking about today, where it comes from. First and foremost, I need to tell you that I do not speak for all Indigenous people. We have a great diversity in terms of our culture, our heritage, our nationalities, the places that we come from, the names that we've given to those places, our stories. Everything is very diverse across Canada for Indigenous people. And so what I speak about when I'm speaking is from my perspective as a Haudenosaunee woman. So I'm a member of the Mohawk Nation, which is one of the Six Nations. Sometimes we're called Six Nations. Sometimes we're called we call ourselves the Haudenosaunee. We prefer to be called the Haudenosaunee. Sometimes we're known as the Iroquois Confederacy, but that's not our word for ourselves. We call ourselves Haudenosaunee, and we prefer to be called that. So the Mohawk are just one of the Six Nations that make up the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. of the 49 clans that we have in our clan system. And so that's the knowledge that I hold or I carry, or I try to speak my best to. There's no such thing as an expert. We all collectively are experts, and I'll just share with you what it is that I know about our culture. And I'll go through with that. Let me see if I can get going. Oops. Hang on, my slides are bouncing around like crazy. Okay, there we go. So what part of the world am I in? And so I know everybody is joining us from all across Canada. And you can see in this picture here, there's a bunch of Confederacy flags. So if anybody has known anything about Six Nations people, it might be that symbol. And that symbol is we use it as a flag today, but it's actually a wampum belt. And I have that wampum belt right here. And so what is a wampum belt? This is a wampum belt. And so a wampum belt is a pre-contact and I'll say post-contact as well, because they're still relevant to our legal system today as Haudenosaunee people, and we've made them agreements with new Canadians and settlers as well that I'll talk to later. But a wampum belt is the Haudenosaunee or Eastern Indigenous nations all along the Atlantic, the coastal Atlantic of Turtle Island. We would weave these belts, and they're made out of, this is a replica belt, so it's made out of glass beads. And our original belts that our hereditary chief system uses are made out of the quahog shell. And the quahog is, it's a type of clam that's indigenous to the Atlantic Ocean. It's actually indigenous to both sides of the ocean. So you can actually find it if you're ever in a beach in England, Wales, you'll actually be able to find quahog shell there. But our artisans would take that quahog shell and we craft them into beads, and we weave the beads together to create a picture or a story that's going to present like a historical record, a legal agreement, an understanding between parties. And so we would put those together, and these would become these are our legal documents. These are our written record. And so this belt right here that I'm holding, you can also see it in the picture below, is where the knowledge that I possess comes from. And so this belt here is actually the very first wampum belt that was made for our by Haudenosaunee people. So Indigenous nations across the East, including Algonquins, Anishinaabe, Maliseet, Mi'kmaq, all along the East, all had wampum belts. And they all have their own stories as to where they began using wampum belts, how they began using them. And so for our particular people, the Haudenosaunee, including the Mohawk Nation, where I come from, we all call this belt the one that it's the founding belt. It's the first one that we made in terms of when we came together as a confederacy, as Six Nations people. So this belt, when you look at it, it can actually be looked at as a geographic map. So I'm not sure what direction you guys can see me from, but let's say that this is east and let's say that this is west. I hope that's the right direction for you guys. So the furthest to the east, this symbol represents the Mohawk Nation. And so that's where I come from and my people. So if you actually took this and just, threw it on top of a map, it would literally tell you that to the east is the Mohawk Nation. You could put it on top of a map and you can actually tell it the geography of our territories just from this belt. A little bit to the west, we have the Oneida Nation. And actually my father's actually a member of the Oneida Nation. And then to the center, we have the Onondaga Nation. And the Onondagas they're also known as the Fire Keepers, because since the founding of our confederacy, our chiefs council, the Grand Council, still meets in the same place that they did at the founding of our confederacy 1,000 years ago, and they've always had Grand Council at Onondaga, and they're called the Fire Keepers because they take care of that council fire for us. And you can see that it's makes geographic sense too, because it's central. It's the easiest location for everybody to converge when we have Grand Council. And so that's what the Onondagas do, and that's their responsibility, is to be the hosts for the Confederacy when our chiefs come together to have a Grand Council. And then to the west of them, we have the Cayuga Nation, and then finally the westernmost nation is the Seneca Nation. And the Senecas are the ones that would have the most relationship to like the Toronto area. If you're looking in the map, it's kind of tough to see on this map. I wanted to be able to use a Google Earth live, but we had to do a PowerPoint. So I tried my best to put on a map where it is that I'm talking about and acknowledging where that history comes from. Again, the Seneca Nation, if you think Buffalo, New York, if you think Niagara Falls, Ontario, that's around the area where the Senecas would have a large relationship when it comes to Canada itself. And let me see. So now we're going to get more into this idea of treaty making and lands. What is a treaty when it comes to Indigenous people? What is its relationship with land? And I guess I don't know if you guys hear the word treaty a lot at school, maybe outside of maybe social studies, if you're learning about civics, that sort of thing. So a treaty, I guess, if I could talk about it in the most basic sense in the West, so Western culture, a treaty is an agreement that happens between two or more nations who are looking to make an agreement that's as beneficial as possible to both sides. And sometimes it's for peace, sometimes it's for economy, sometimes it can be for a number of things, but basically it's at least two or more nations coming together to create and establish an agreement or a relationship of how they're going to conduct things peacefully and beneficially for each other. And in the most simple way, that's how I would describe what a treaty relationship is for the Western culture. And so what I wanted to actually talk about today is what is a treaty for Indigenous people, or again, from my perspective as a Haudenosaunee woman, a Mohawk Nation person. And so we've always had agreements, we've always had treaties as Indigenous people. It is not something that just was a new concept to us when Europeans came here. We've always, as long as there's people and cultures sharing a space, there's always going to be a need to communicate with each other and to talk about, our feelings, what's going on with us, what's happening in our lands, what can we do to improve upon our communication with each other and how we might take care of a land together. And so treaties for Indigenous people, then the best way to talk about it is three parties, is how I kind of how I kind of think of it. The first party that I'll say is human beings, which is a little different from what you would say is a Western agreement. So a Western agreement is between two or more distinct nations. 2, 3, can be 100 nations could sign a treaty, but they're split up by their nationhood. In Indigenous treaties or Haudenosaunee treaties, because that's the people I come from and the knowledge that I'm speaking for, human beings, no matter your color, your creed, where you come from, are all one party. And the reason why we're all one party is because we all, regardless of who we think we are, have the same needs: food, housing, clothing, the clothing on your shelter, education, medicine. No matter your color or your creed or where you come from in the world, human beings all have the same needs. As when we create treaties, it's impossible to separate human beings from each other because our needs are the same. The second treaty party that I'll mention is creation. So in an Indigenous treaty or an agreement, the rights of the environment have a place, and they have an equal right as human beings do in these treaties. So I'm going to talk a little more about this belt as we go along. This is called the dish with one spoon. And so I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. I want to cover this really quick. So creation, we need to understand, like, Indigenous people knew from the very beginning that the environment is finite, that resources are finite, and therefore they are precious. And I think everybody the world over has an understanding of that, but we don't seem to, as a Western society, seem to make the connection between the preciousness and the finiteness of natural resources and the environment, and the environment having actual legal rights. So in Canada, we don't say or can't say that water has rights in the same way that human beings do. Trees, do they have rights? You know, plants and medicines, animals, do we consider all of these things to have rights at all? In Canada, we don't, and in most Western societies, we don't in general. But this is something that pre-contact our ancestors, and you know, these belts that I'm showing you today are proof of that, of our understanding of two things: our understanding of the finiteness of resources, and also the fact that resources have a right and a responsibility, that we have a right and a right to resources, but we also have a responsibility to make sure that they're there and that they're being taken care of, so that creation can thrive. While even with us, you know, taking from creation for our needs, because we also have a right and we also have a need for those resources as well. So those are the first two parties. One is human beings, regardless of nationality, color, or creed, we're all the same. So we represent only one party, not two, not more. We're one. The second is then creation, who has a need just as much as we do to survive. So while we recognize that we have a right to take from creation because we need things to survive, we also understand that we have a responsibility to creation to replenish itself. And now the third party is the coming phases. In my language, we refer to them as the faces that have yet to come up from underground. And so in my Haudenosaunee culture, when we talk about children that are unborn, we consider them with the faces that are still underground, because we have this culture of how human beings are born, and they're not conceived 9 months before they're born. Human beings decide who their parents are in our culture while they're in Gardonhyage, in the sky world. So in our people, we say that human beings, or the spirits that are inside us, are Otnigurna, is what that's called. Your spirit or your mind comes from the sky world, Gardonhyage. And then when we make a choice to be born into this world, we look down at Ofunjage, at our mother, the earth, and we see the human beings on the planet. And we make the decision when we're in the sky world that that's my mother and that's going to be my father. And so when we come down from the sky world, our Otnigurna, our spirit, comes down, and we don't connect with the family yet. What we do is we go underground. And so we say that the faces that are still unborn, their faces are under the ground. And what happens is that we stay under the ground there, and we wait for our mothers to walk over us. So just one day your mother's walking along, minding her own business, and she's walking along, and then when she walks over top of us, we come up into her body from our Otnigurna, not our physical bodies, but our Otnigurna, that thing that we have that makes us human beings, that connection to the sky world, that Otnigurna, it's under the ground. And when she walks over top of it, that's when we come up underneath her, in her feet. We come up into her feet and we go up into her body, and then we stay there, and our spirit and our Otnigurna is with our mother. And we're with our mother until it's time for us to be conceived, time for us to be born. So our mother is even carrying us, our Otnigurna, for us until we're ready to be conceived, ready to be born. And so that being said, those things that I'm talking about, that the children being under the ground, they have a right. We know already that they have rights to the environment and the land, the resources around us, because they have a need for it, just because they are also human beings. They have a need. So therefore we have a responsibility to those faces that have not yet come up from the ground. Those faces, they've not yet come up, but we have a responsibility to them to make sure that everything that's around us that you can see, that is required, that is necessary between us and creation, to make sure that it remains plentiful for them. So that's that idea of the future generations that we're talking about. And so the three parties in every treaty, when I'm talking about it from a Haudenosaunee perspective, regardless of whether it's 2 nations, whether it's 100 nations, they're not considered individual parties. They're considered one because we are humans and we all have the same needs. Creation has a right to thrive and to survive. So that right and that responsibility that we have is an indenture into all of our treaties, all of our agreements, from ancestral times all the way to the modern day. And the environment has that right, and we have that responsibility to it. And then also we acknowledge the right, the responsibilities, the rights of the unborn faces, the coming faces, and the responsibility that we have to make sure that everything stays good and clear and well for them. Let me switch through my slides here. Oh, whoops. Oh, bouncing all over the place here. I got the super sensitive computer. I think I press it once and then it kind of flips through a bunch of slides. But anyways, I like to share, this is dish with one spoon territory. And some of you might have heard that terminology before. I know that a lot of you might not have. It's starting to be heard a lot more. Like if you live in Toronto, the GTA, the greater Toronto area, this is the territory that I sort of, it's a small part of what we call the dish with one spoon territory. And so this belt right here that I'm holding, this is what is the dish with one spoon belt. When those of you who are in the Toronto area, you might have heard of this. So I do understand you guys are all across Canada right now. And so this belt right here, in my language, it's called sewa de quaternat. So like one large spoon. So we call it dish with one spoon. You can see that the dish is in the middle. And this is a pre-contact belt, like I was mentioning before. Our people had a very in-depth knowledge and understanding of the resources being finite. And this belt is evidence of that. This belt is 2 things, I'll say. It's evidence of our awareness of the need to protect the environment, of the finiteness of it. And also it's it also talks about us being able to share space with many people, with different cultures, societies. Everybody's a human being and we all have the same needs, but we also, this is us recognizing the rights of the environment, which is something that most countries on earth don't actually have today, is acknowledging that the environment has rights. But this belt right here is a pre-contact acknowledgement of that by the Haudenosaunee and the people who are a part of dish with one spoon territory. If you look at this map, you can see, again, we see a little bit of Canada, a little bit of the United States, because there's no border for Indigenous people. Borders are for our Western nations. For our Western nations, we don't have borders. What we have is called, the best way to describe it as Indigenous people is borderlands. So not border lines, but borderlands. And so what happens is you have Indigenous people. I don't know if you can see my mouse moving around. I'm using my mouse on the map. Jeff, can you see my mouse moving around? I hope I can see everybody who's here. But so what you can see here, yeah, Jeff, can you see my mouse moving around?
Yeah, I can see it moving around, but it might be the picture might be too small for some people. So, but I think you're doing a good job explaining it.
Okay, yeah. So I was gonna, even if you don't see all the names on this map, at least you get an understanding. Okay, it's definitely Eastern North America. Those are the Great Lakes. That's kind of that's the important part of this map. But anyways, so you can see the line between the United States and Canada here. And so lines are how in Western society we decide what belongs to what nation. This line is the difference between what makes a Canadian and an American. Border lines don't exist for Indigenous people. We have something that I'll say is borderlands, and that's what's described when you talk about dish with one spoon territory. So in this whole area here, if I had to talk about it, you have my people, my ancestors come from New York State, and they come a little bit into this Buffalo area. More of my ancestors come from this area here, which is the best way to describe them is the neutral people, but they're actually neutral is, there are actually many different neutral nations, but they came from this area here, and then all in the northern shore. This is Lake Ontario, by the way, if you can see the names of the other Great Lakes, but this is Lake Ontario that I'm talking about. The northern shore and all the way up towards the Quebec area was all Wendat territory. So there's many different Wendat territory people, because the Wendats are a confederacy in the way that the Haudenosaunee are. So I'm Mohawk, but I'm also Haudenosaunee. But not all Haudenosaunee are Mohawks. We're Six Nations. And so that's the best way I could describe it. The Huron, the Wendat Confederacy is also like that. And the Neutrals are also a confederacy. And we are all related in that we are called technically Iroquois people, Iroquois speaking people. So our languages are very similar. Actually, the Wendat language is actually extremely similar to Mohawk, where you could actually speak to each other and understand each other very well. Even though we're not considered the same people at all, our languages are very similar, and we have creation stories that are the same origins. Our cultures, we all lived in longhouses, and so the difference being my people, our ancestral villages are on the southern shore of Lake Ontario, and the Wendats are on the northern shore. And then here, the neutral people kind of lived in this whole peninsula you can see here between all the Great Lakes. And I know their villages went as far as Detroit area or Windsor, Ontario. They kind of went into that direction too. And so ancestrally, we're all Iroquois in that we can understand each other. Our cultures are similar, but we are distinct nations separately. And then to the north of us, see, if you go up into the lakes area, I mean, I should say all of this is Anishinaabe territory. And so Anishinaabes are encompassed by the Mississaugas, the Odawa, the Ojibwe people. Chippewas are another terminology. Specifically in this area here, you can see where you can see that there's a number of distinct languages and peoples, and there's a lot going on here. And imagine, in the 1600s, 1500s, pre-contact, when this agreement was first made among these many people, this dish with one spoon relationship was happening. You can see that in those times that the Greater Toronto area has always been a gathering place of nations and of people. And think pre-contact too, before there was no airplanes, no trains, planes, automobiles, no airports. The best way to connect all these people was by water. So you have the St. Lawrence Seaway, you have all the Great Lakes here, and they're all connected by water. And you can see right here in between like Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, this little spot right here, this is the only corridor when it came to, north and south. Now today it's a border between Canada and the United States, but you can kind of see, if you're somebody who's traversing the lands trying to get places, that's kind of the only way to go. Otherwise you're walking all the way around these Great Lakes. So that was the accessible place for us. And so for Haudenosaunee people, again, our ancestral villages are south of the lake, and the neutral people are who lived here in the Greater Toronto area, as far east as London, Ontario, all that area. This was all neutral villages and the neutral confederacy, and the Wendats lived to the north of the lake. And then the Mississaugas lived, again, this is all Algonquin territory. They lived even further to the north. And so we basically had different needs out of this environment. Again, we're talking about land, we're talking about environment, and we're talking about how the dish with one spoon came to be. So our people, my people are agricultural people. So we farm, we corn, beans, and squash. The three sisters, those are seeds that our people carry. To this day, they came with us from the sky world. Okay. And so I'm getting, oops. Oh my God, I'm flipping through all these too quickly. So when we came here from the sky, we brought those from the sky world. So basically this area here, sorry, I just got a message just now. So our people farmed here, but we also hunted, but we lived in large villages. And so it was hard to keep things, I guess, once you use your land too much, the animals become scarce. So we would actually come up in this direction here to go hunting. And then this area too is also known as the Carolinian Forest. For those of you who are part in the GTA area, it's actually one of the most the most biodiverse regions in the country. And so 70% of Canada's endangered species and species at risk live in the Carolinian forest. And so there's a lot of medicines there. And so the Mississaugas would come down to this area to gather medicines because they lived up just a little like Canadian Shield. It gets, if you look north of Toronto, it actually gets to be a little less. It's not the Carolinian forest. So they came down during the medicine times to get medicine. And then the Haudenosaunee would come up during hunting season to come and hunt. And so we would never occupy this area here. It was more like a relationship of going back and forth for different needs at different times of year. And then there was the neutrals and the Wendat who lived here. And when this belt came together, this agreement came together, it was really about us trying to understand how we share space together. And so this dish in the middle represents that finite relationship that we have with the land around us. That we know that there's only so much that can fit into a dish. And if you want to look at that as a representation of a dish, if you have a bowl in front of you, there's only so much that can go inside of it. And that represents the finiteness of resources. And so we understand with this belt that everybody has a right to take from it, because as human beings, we all have needs, but we also understand that we need to be able to share what's in that bowl with the people who are around us, and also for future generations. So we're always being mindful of how much we are taking out of that bowl and what we're doing to contribute to make sure that it's always full. And so what I like about this belt too is that it's pre-contact, and it's evidence of the rights of the environment being acknowledged by Indigenous people for all time. And so I'll just flip through this. These are just some place names I wanted to share. I can always share those if anybody's more interested in place names in the area. So when we go into this two-row wampum belt, the next belt I wanted to talk about is the first post-contact belt. And so that's this one right here. And this belt right here, the two-row wampum, is the first agreement that took place between the new settlers, which were the Europeans and Indigenous people. And so basically it's a foundation of our relationship in that when this belt was made, you read it from one end to the other, which is so that at the top of this belt, this is our canoe as Indigenous people, and this is the ship of the Dutch, because it was actually the Dutch that we made this relationship with in the 1600s. They enter the water, the river of life, together at the same time, which is very important because it basically establishes that there was a start to our relationship, and that we decided and chose to go side by side down the river of life together. And so there's no place that the ship or the canoe contact each other. They don't connect because we're side by side in terms of our partnership, but we're also respecting the fact that we are different people. So culture, customs, ways of life are all within our canoe and within that ship. And something that comes with relationships like this, these treaty relationships that Indigenous people make, is the responsibilities that come with those agreements. So when new settlers came to the New World, what they had to understand when they came here is that there were agreements that they needed to understand about how to live in this world, because North America wasn't an easy place to live in the 1600s. And so they knew that these agreements were already there, they were already made. And they served as foundations into not just how to coexist with Indigenous people, but how to live with the world, how to respect our mother. And these tools are already here. When I'm thinking about this last slide I wanted to put here, why should any of this matter to anyone? And I'll just end it really quickly here. This is a screenshot of Google Earth that I took. And what you can see against the Greater Toronto Area, and this little green spot right here is Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. And what I wanted to point out here is that all of this greenery that you can see is our trees. It's the only place in Southern Ontario that still has Carolinian forests that are freestanding. If you're not considering like Algonquin Provincial Park, which is a massive park, Walpole Island First Nation also looks like a green spot on a map, right? Like this. This is kind of what's happening why should this matter to anyone? All this stuff I'm talking about, it's that the reason it should matter is because you can see it even from space, what happens when the rights of the environment aren't being acknowledged. Very few, and so this is kind of what's existing in our territory in Southern Ontario, in Southern Ontario. I want to say something right now to all the students that are listening. What I really want to do is apologize and tell you that I'm sorry, that this is the world that you're inheriting from us. Solving solutions like this, when we're talking about respecting the environment, we have the tools that are already there to help us frame it in a way that would make sense to indenture the rights of the environment into law, or into a way that into the way that we interact with the environment. But I also want to just say that it's not easy to transition back into that. Adults don't have all the answers. We don't have, in order to look at a map like this and think of how we're going to fix it so that there is enough for everybody. There's not enough for everybody who's here. And you can see that how many, like, look around your room right now, how many objects in your room were created in the environment that you live in. And so that's something to keep in mind and to bear in mind too, that we no longer depend on the environment that we live in because we've allowed ourselves to take from other places. A lot of, the clothing that we wear, the food that we eat, a lot of it is us going to other environments and taking from there because our environment can no longer accommodate us. And that's what's happening when we fail to understand that the environment that we live in has rights, and the future generations have a right as well. And so I kind of want to end it. I'll end it on that. I know I'm kind of trying to make sure I'm not going over. I had an idea in mind of when I was going to end it. And but then I know we started a little late too. So I just want to be respectful of time. And yeah, I don't know if anybody had any questions, or Jeff, I want to be mindful of time with everything that I'm talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think we can get to some questions. But first of all, thank you, Dakota, for sharing all that. I think it's a great introduction of what a lot of people are going to be covering this week in various of the different sessions, and a good basis of knowledge and of history that I think will inform a lot of the discussions. And I know just from some of the questions I'm seeing here, there's a lot of good questions we can get to. But I just want, I loved what you shared just about the three parties of the wampum. It's humans, it's creation, and it's the future. There's such a focus on sustainability and partnership, and I think that's two really important things to highlight, especially if you look at my background, I have something from IKEA and behind me, which is not from the natural environment. So I think those are really good things to keep in mind as we try to move forward in our current society. So I just we have a lot of questions coming in, and I want to go back to just a couple of the earlier ones that related to some people were asking, Andreka and Erica both had a question about, what's the meaning of the word wampum? And then some other people also had some questions about the significance of the blue and white that's used on the wampum belts. And how long, some of the students were also wondering how long they take to be created.
Mm-hmm. Okay, lots of good questions. So the word wampum is it's not actually a Haudenosaunee or Mohawk word. I believe it's derived from a Wampanoag word. There's literally people there's people on the east coast, the Wampanoag people. I think it comes from their dialect, and it's just a word that's become an English word. In Mohawk, they're called Onegorha. And it just means, and it's just the bead itself, or an individual bead is Onegorha, a wampum bead. And so I'll say that Onegorha is what they're called. And so the significance of a natural quahog shell, I wish I brought one with me. And I had problems with the internet this morning at my office, and I had quahog there, and then I forgot to bring it. So I came home to do the talk here because my internet was disrupted. But this is a natural quahog bead is actually purple and white. And so the big part of why they're purple and white is because those are the two colors that a wampum belt bead is. And there's a lot of connotations here of what the black and what the white can mean. This isn't so much like a lot of societies when it's a darker color, because even though it's purple, we actually refer to it in the language as black, like black and white, even though it's purple and white. We kind of have the same connotations with darkness that a lot of cultures will have. So it could mean war, it could mean death, it could mean bad things. And but it doesn't always mean those things, because right now these black beads don't represent bad things. It's just they're just in contrast to the fact that the river is white, and the white representing, like purity or value or the thing or preciousness, life, all of those things. And so this dish with one, or this is the two-row wampum, which is the first agreement that was ever made between a European nation and an indigenous nation, was the two-row. And it is read a little differently. I can't remember what the last question was. It was just about the significance of the colors.
Yeah, there's a question on the significance of the colors, and one on how long it takes to create something like that.
Oh my God. I guess it depends on the belt. Like, you'd think that it was, I have another belt right here, and this is actually an Anishinaabe, so an Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee friendship belt. And so this is made between two indigenous nations. And so it's not so much the length. Like, this could be done in, a week, 3 or 4 days if you're not busy. And when it comes to the actual weaving of it, but it's not so much the length of it as the width, because I made that belt and it probably took me about a week to make. I made this one, and this one I did nothing else for 3 months. Took me 3 months.
Okay.
And that is your kind of 9 to 5, like, you're not doing anything at all else but that. And so that took 3 months. If I was to do it a couple hours a day, it would take a year easily, because of how wide it is. Each of these rows is put on like one row at a time. One row to make this belt takes almost an hour to put on. And then sometimes your belt break, your strings will break if the tension is too high. So there's a lot of like backtracking and having to redo them. And so, but yeah, if you think that one row takes about an hour to put on, you can get an idea of how many hours actually went into the fabrication of this and just the weaving of it. So.
Yeah, no, it sounds like so much work, and there's so much meaning behind them as well. It's so interesting. I think we only have time for one more question, and there's a lot coming in, and I wish we could get to all of them. But the one that I think I saw that maybe I would really love to give you the last word on, Dakota, is a student in one of the classes joining us today wants to know what the word sustainability means to you.
Sustainability. Again, it's like the dish with one spoon, and I can't think of, like, in a lot of indigenous cultures, and I know in mine for sure, there's no word for environment, because to have a word for environment insinuates that you're somehow separate from it. Our cultures and our languages don't have words for these things because we aren't separate from our environment. We can't imagine ourselves in our languages ancestrally. We can't imagine ourselves outside of our environment. And so when you think sustainability, I do think that dish with one spoon belt is that evidence from coming from our ancestors directly on how to think and how to frame sustainability. Again, you have that bowl in the middle, which represents the environment, and a finite amount of resources can fit into that bowl. And so it's about contribution. Sustainability is about contribution. It's about your right to take, but it's also your responsibility to give back. And what that means for you it can't be the same thing as it is for me, because you live in a different environment. You have, like, the people around you are different people, and you have to understand how sustainability will work from the frame of where you are and where you're existing. The best thing I could say, if you really want to move forward with these kind of teachings and understandings when it comes to sustainability, is to get to know the indigenous people where you come from. That map, that satellite image I showed you earlier, where it's just literally, you can see my reserve where I live from space, because there's no trees around us except for the ones on the reserve. It's a fact that when the rights of indigenous people are supported, then the land is being taken care of. You can see and understand, you can see it from space, like it's quantifiable that when our rights are being protected, the environment's also being protected. And so start to think about what that might mean from where you come from. And the indigenous people who are local, they have their own cultures, their own stories to talk about how sustainability worked for them. And the food and how the food resources and how they would take from the environment and how they would give back to it as well. And so, but I will mention that, in the language, to say that there's a word for sustainability, I don't know off the top of my head, like I've never heard of it. I know we don't have a word for environment, but you can see that the principles are there and that they are and that they do already exist. It's just a matter of looking for those tools and that framework and seeing how it's gonna help us fit better and more sustainably within the environments that we live in.
I mean, I think that's a perfect way to close off this conversation. I think that's those are some great points people can walk away with today, Dakota. I know I for sure will. They're really impactful, and I thank you so much for this presentation today and for joining us. And I can't wait to keep going on my learning journey and engaging with people or just Indigenous friends like you. So thank you so much. I have to wrap it up here. Unfortunately, I want to thank Dakota again for speaking. And thank all of you for joining. I hope you have a great rest of your week and enjoy the rest of your sessions this week as well.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a good day.